On the U.S. frontiers of the 19th century, photography opens a window into overlooked backstage scenes. Women from brothels recorded in their rooms, facing the camera. The images, sometimes formal, sometimes improvised, suggest work, intimacy, and control of their own portrait, challenging the gaze of the observer. In Death Valley in the 1870s, borax began to move again. To cross the dryness of the Great Basin came the wagons pulled by 20 mules, lines that marched firmly, carrying the ore from the mines to the depots. The harshness of the journey shaped a method that combined animal strength, engineering, and coordination to overcome the desert. On the left of the photo, Black Elk appears as both witness and protagonist of two milestones. In 1876, he took part in Little Bighorn, when U.S. forces faced several Great Plains tribes, among them the Lakota Sioux, at a decisive point of indigenous resistance. His life links the scene to the broad thread of American history. Son of Cynthia Ann Parker, captured in childhood and taken in by the Comanches, Quanah Parker grew up between frontiers and assumed leadership. When buffalo hunters invaded the plains, he rose in resistance, wove alliances and strategies to defend land and culture, opening the passage between an end and a beginning. In an old portrait, two sex workers pose in a brothel room in Miles, Montana. A judge of the time said there were 1,000 residents and little order. The photo condenses the contrast. A glossy setting before faltering laws, luxury and precariousness side by side, revealing the city between showcase and ruin in motion. In the photo, a cowboy from Caldwell, Kansas, shows that the outfit comes from the trade. Hat, boots, and belt serve before they decorate. They face sun, dust, and saddle. Depending on climate and terrain, he chooses chaps over his pants, protecting his legs and against the rain. Each piece has a function and tells the routine of the open range. Pointed out as his last image, this photograph of George Armstrong Custer reveals a military man who made the camera an ally. Restless about his own figure, he posed more than 150 times. 2 months after this portrait came the decisive episode, the Battle of Little Bighorn in 1876, where his command would collapse. With the decline of the daguerreotype, the ambrotype took the stage. Image on glass, lower cost, peak in the 1850s. In this portrait, an unnamed man faces the camera. The steady gaze and restrained posture turn the instant into a memory of the West in transition, a sign of a frontier being redrawn in the young nation. In Greenwood, Kansas, noon halts the march. The emigrants gather around the wagon, share food, and catch their breath. Cutlery clinks lightly. Voices exchange messages. The path regains rhythm. When hunger eases, the vehicle advances, and each step signs promises of work and land, a tomorrow under construction. In the early years of the 20th century, Joella Irwin crossed the rodeo fence and opened space for cowgirls. In varied circuits, she competed in different events and proved skill, courage, and rhythm. Her journey united tradition and change, attracted audiences, and brought new female athletes to the center of the arena. In 1884, a cabinet card, a popular photographic format, records a scene at the San Carlos Reservation in Arizona. The portrait, considered the first known image of Geronimo, presents the Apache leader who, from historical role to mass culture, became a lasting symbol widely recognized across generations. Jesse James became the most famous face of the James Younger gang. Leading robberies, he crossed the West and became an emblem of crime. With each strike, his fame grew, fueled by newspapers and conversations that painted him as rebel or villain. The journey ended abruptly. Betrayed at home, killed in 1882, the legend swallowed the man. Symbol of U.S. expansion, Kit Carson crossed trails that defined the West. He left the fur trade, became an explorer, and in the mountains earned fame for endurance. Later, he guided John Pathfinder Fremont on decisive expeditions, fixing his name in an era when maps were born step by step and opened future paths. The photograph, around 1880, shows sitters still unconfirmed. Researchers point out that the standing man may be John Kinney, who in 1875 took command of a gang in southern New Mexico. By occupying that role, He gained notoriety and marked the criminal scene. For that reason, the image still raises questions. In 1899, Pearl Hart robbed a stagecoach and entered the history of the West. The news crossed states, brought her name to headlines, and in a short time to Cosmopolitan magazine. There, her figure took on public outline and was fixed as a farewell sign of an era when old trails gave way to a new country. At 15 years old, Rose Dunn, the Rose of Cimarron, crossed the border from news into legend. In 1895, in Ingalls, Oklahoma Territory, she is said to have helped her fugitive boyfriend in a shootout between agents and outlaws. Versions differ, but it was there that her name left anonymity and began to fuel the myth of the Old West. From the front to the Corral, Texas John Slaughter traveled a path that illuminates the Old West. In the Civil War, he served as a Texas Ranger. With peace, he followed cattle and established his last ranch near Douglas, Arizona. A photo from around 1885 crystallizes the turning point and extends his memory to those arriving now. Olive Oatman turned her own life into proof of endurance. Captured by the Mojave, she lived with the community and, in that coexistence, received on her chin a tattoo in blue cactus ink. It was not ornament. It was a rite that, according to tradition, ensured a serene passage to the afterlife. Thus, the mark became a reminder of crossed destinies. The Texas Rangers emerged improvised in 1823, when Stephen Austin summoned men to protect settlers. In 1835, they gained official structure. Throughout Texan history, they patrolled borders, hunted fugitives, and carried out missions that upheld order in a growing territory and consolidated their fame. A forgotten photo reappears. A woman drives cattle through a West, still without a name. She appears by chance, discovered by Mark Lee Gardner in a Missouri store, and opens a passage into a past of dust, work, and command. Who was she? Where did she live? What journey brought her there? The image asks for answers and returns questions. In the far reaches of the Old West, Tiburcio Vasquez etched his name into collective memory. The 1865 photo crystallizes the face that became an emblem of transgression. For nearly 20 years, he crossed villages and roads in crimes, shaping the myth of Hispanic outlaws and fueling, to this day, the dispute over his reputation. In the Old West, the routine of cowboys went beyond cattle drives. Between one drive and another, many sought the studio to immortalize themselves. Worn hat, used boots, firm belt. The portrait became a keepsake and a certificate of trade, putting on paper the life they rode and wanted to preserve as a milestone for themselves and those who remained. Bill Doolin, outlaw in Oklahoma Territory, became a target when the reward increased. The fame of the robberies mobilized groups and trackers who tightened the noose. In August 1896, the hunt ended. In confrontation, he fell under gunfire. At the front, Heck Thomas, deputy marshal, led the action that ended his trajectory. During the funeral of Tom McClory, Frank McClory, and Billy Clanton, a sign was raised, "Murdered in the streets of Tombstone." It was not protest. It was a reminder of a shock. In 1881, behind the OK Corral, a brief duel silenced 3 men and launched a story that crossed generations, shaping the myth of the West, which still echoes today. Kate Rockwell, stage performer, made her mark on Alaskan miners in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. In crowded saloons, she alternated songs and steps that led laughter to attentive silence. The climax came with the red chiffon, her trademark. Thus, she tamed rough nights and left a vivid memory on that frontier. In the 1865 photo, Wild Bill Hickok appears without stage scenery or costume. Far from the theatrical outfits of other poses, he wears what he used in everyday life. The detail reveals his preference in presenting himself in the Old West. Looking at the image, a faithful portrait emerges of the style and clothing choices of the time without studio tricks. In 1876, at the height of the cattle drives, Bat Masterson and Wyatt Earp posed in Dodge City. The image is not just a record. It consolidates the alliance of 2 lawmen willing to impose order in a frontier town. By fixing this meeting, the portrait connects the cattle trails to the birth of an authority that would shape the history of the United States.